I watched as the helicopter pilot began his preparations to take off, barely a minute after touching down on the helipad. As Mark helped Savannah step down off the vehicle, the pilot gestured towards his headset, and I fished my radio receiver from my pocket and put my own headset on, barely quieting the still spinning rotors. "That's good? I think we're good here. Man, thanks again. Don't mention it. Just remember that you've only got exactly 48 hours. If you're not back on the platform and ready by then, I'll have to wait another week to swing back around and get you, and that'll cost extra. Good luck. I'll see you guys then." I thanked him, and as soon as the others finished unloading our prepared bags onto the helipad, we stood and watched as the helicopter took flight and disappeared quickly into the inky blackness of the starless night. I waited a moment longer, looking out into the open ocean below me, my headlight beam faintly glittering against the calm ripples of the sea. "We don't have all night. Let's get indoors before the wind picks up," Julian muttered, breaking the silence. I turned away from the sea and towards the group. Julian had already picked up his duffel bag and had already begun to hastily move towards the stairs descending to the crew quarters. Mark seemed solemn as usual, but even in the dark I could make out the smile creeping through his face as he helped Savannah grab her bags as she kissed him on the cheek. Maria sat silent, eyes locked on the clouds that had swallowed up our transport, as Mark and Savannah descended out of view. I stood next to my sister, putting my hand on her tense shoulder as I noticed her knuckles turn white gripping her backpack. "You all right?" I asked after a moment. She stood motionless, and I felt her shoulders shivering. Mark said we should be able to get the rig's reserve power on. "If we get inside, we'll be able to warm up." She turned her head to me and attempted to mask her fright and face with a sheepish smile. "Yeah, sure. Sorry. It's just different than I expected." "A bit." "Yeah," I lied. In truth, I'd studied my ass off doing as much weeks prior to our arrival at the rig. I'd poured through company records. I'd watched every video I could explaining oil rig architecture, and I'd even researched local oceanic weather patterns this time of year for this area. She begged to come along, but now, standing here shaking, it was obvious she hadn't prepared like the rest of us. I gently grabbed her backpack from her shaking hand and made my way towards the staircase. She followed close behind, and as we made our way towards the large bolted door sealing off the crew area, she quietly called over, "Hey Eli, what's up? Thanks for letting me and Julian tag along." I nodded, as if it were no big deal that they'd been permitted to join this expedition. Mark had approached me weeks ago, with the opportunity of a lifetime, an oil rig in international waters, decommissioned for almost a decade, unmanned, and slated to be dismantled in the coming months. Even though we were further from a city than any of us had ever been, this was undoubtedly an urban explorer's wet dream. It had been years since Mark, Savannah, and I had the opportunity to go somewhere new, and with our increasingly busy lives, we figured that this was the perfect last hurrah for our old hobby. The timing worked out perfect, and we each managed to scrape enough money together to find and hire a private helicopter pilot to make the 2 trips required to drop us off and pick us back up. In all fairness, Maria had joined us on some of our trips in years prior. Being a few years younger than us, we opted to only let her tag along on our lower stakes outings, but she was an adult now, and had begged to be allowed to come with us for this final trip. It took a substantial amount of convincing for Savannah and Mark to vote yes on bringing her, but it certainly didn't hurt that Maria's new boyfriend Julian had actually worked 6 months on a rig a few years back. As I pushed the heavy iron door open, the hinges groaned against the soft, corroded metal, a sound carrying through the empty corridors. I found the rest of the group already making their way through the narrow hallway, and was relieved to see that the area generally matched what I'd already researched. The quarters consisted of 2 floors, the upper of which we were currently passing through to reach the lower-level access stairs at the end of the hall. We passed the expected amenities, including a galley, a laundry room, several changing rooms, and a large dry storage pantry, long empty. The crew living area, consisting of a common room and several shared bedrooms, waited for us 1 level below. As we descended the stairs, we each found a bedroom to begin to unload our things. For the next 2 nights, these quiet, windowless white rooms would be our home. I unpacked my bedroll and went to sit on the bunk bed, when I heard Mark call out to gather us in the hall. As I stood in the doorway, he smiled and looked around at each of us before speaking. Alright, so, we made it. Place seems to be in much better condition than we expected to, which is a good sign. I think before we start settling in for the night though, we should review our plan. A couple of us let out an overly dramatic sigh, and I looked over to see Savannah chuckle as she rolled her eyes. Even though a plan was a necessity in a situation like this, we all knew that Mark would plan his own funeral if he could. Yeah, get it out of your system. Mark smirks. We'll have a busy day of fooling around out here tomorrow, but there are still precautions and things we need to take care of first. Julian, you'll come with me up to the controlled deck here in a minute to see if we can get the auxiliary generators running. That'll get us some light and heat in here. Elijah, you stay here with Maria and Seth. Julian, you ready? Sure. Just give me a minute to get my stuff. I looked across the hall to see Julian smiling for the first time all day. He was hard to read at times, but I could tell the familiarity of a place like this was slowly starting to bring him to life. As Mark dismissed us from our meeting, I smiled as I gestured a sloppy salute. I watched Julian pop back into the room he'd chosen, and shut the door behind him for a few moments. A minute later he emerged, pulling a pair of bolt cutters and utility gloves from his duffel bag. Maria, already changed into more comfortable clothes, ran her fingers through his curly hair and hugged him before he and Mark left. For the first time since we boarded the helicopter earlier that evening, I had a few minutes to unwind. It was still too cold inside to take off my jacket just yet, but I kicked off my boots and laid down on the carpeted floor. Unlike anything we'd ever explored before, this place was actually fairly well kept. The carpet, although old and shaggy, was free of debris and still felt soft to the touch. My headlamp illuminated a pristine white ceiling, lower than what I expected. As Maria tried to keep idle conversation with Savannah, I just smiled and shut my eyes for a minute, enjoying the satisfaction of having pulled off the coolest bee ever. It must have been about 10 minutes later when a low vibrating rumble shook the floor beneath us for just a minute, before settling to a droning hum barely perceptible but distinct from the ocean waves. I felt a shot of easy ocean air begin to flow through the vent above my head. Before softening and becoming warm and cozy comfort, I stood up and quickly located a light switch at the end of the hallway. Flicking it bathed us in bright, artificial white light. The girls stood up, and we began to take in our surroundings in full when the door at the far end of the common room swung open, Mark and Julian returning to join us in the warm. Maria ran up to Julian, and practically tackling him as she showered praises on him with the giddiness of a schoolgirl. Mark sauntered across the newly ago interior, taking in its artifice and cramped nature before plopping down next to Savannah, resting his head on her shoulder. He looked more tired than usual, and I recognized his brow furrow. How was it out there? You guys find the control deck okay? I prodded after a moment. Yeah, it was fine. Julian had it right on the money. Dude knew exactly where to take us. Right over the moon pool, at the very top. He sounded almost apathetic as he told me, his eyes gazing off into nowhere as Savannah scratched his back. Everything okay, man? You seem a little out of it. Something happened out there? Mark stared blankly for a few seconds, until his eyes focused on me and he seemed to process what I'd said. Oh yeah. No, nothing happened. Don't worry. It's just, like, you know when you're hit with a really bad déjà vu and instead of it only lasting a second, it lasts for like a minute or two? Savannah stopped scratching his back and wrapped her arm around his shoulders, pulling him closer. Yeah, she chimed in. I get that sometimes. It's probably gonna happen at least once or twice when we're here. Been a while since we got in somewhere that wasn't rinsed already. It'll feel just like college. Yeah, I guess so. Mark seemed distant still. Julian and Maria came and sat down in the hall with us, smiling and holding hands. After a few seconds, Mark's eyes suddenly lit up. You guys won't believe how sick tomorrow's gonna be. Even just what I could see with my headlamp looked incredible. Up top in the control room, there's a shit ton of old broadcasting equipment, and you'll never guess what Julian found under the control desk. He paused, either for dramatic effect or because he really wanted us to guess. After a moment of our non-compliance, he rolled his eyes and reached into his jacket's interior pocket, pulling out a keyring with what I could only assume was every key and access tag we'd need to find our way around the facility. Holy shit. It was just there under the desk? Yeah, he said on his old rig. The manager dude. Hey Jewel, what did you say he's called? The tool pusher, Julian said, wrapping his arm around Maria as she pulled at the carpet. Yeah, the tool pusher. Anyways, the tool pusher would always keep a master key set in his office. Only people with the office key could get in, so it was never a problem. Thankfully, we brought a key of our own. He gestured towards the bolt cutters that Julian had set down in the hall. We laughed for a moment, and then a few more. It was good to all be here and to have successfully pulled this off. We'd never cracked anything like this before, and I won't lie, I think we were all just a little giddy that we'd done it. After a bit, Maria caught me beginning to yawn, and followed suit. Seth checked the time, and we were surprised to see that we'd somehow already spent an hour on board, and midnight was rapidly approaching. Mark made some dumb remark about time flying when you're having fun, and told us to plan to wake up at 7 so we could start exploring the upper levels. Julian and Maria slipped into their room as Savannah helped pull Mark up, and the two of them wished me good night before retreating to their bunk. I closed my door behind me, and thought to myself that this was a pretty awesome last hurrah before turning in for the night. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mark knocking on my door. Hey Eli. Wake up man. It's nearly 7:30. We managed to get the water and stove running in the galley. Oatmeal and bacon for breakfast if you're hungry. I rolled over and checked my phone. I hadn't bothered to set an alarm, but I figured I wouldn't have slept so well as to sleep in. I groggily rolled out of bed and got dressed for the day before joining the others at the galley. Maria greeted me with a sly smile. Morning, idiot. Couldn't sleep? No. I slept so well. Usually I can't sleep on boats. The rocking bothers me too much. Savannah put down her instant coffee and rolled her eyes at me. Well, we're not on a boat, Eli. There's not going to be any rocking. This thing is bolted to the seafloor. Julian put up his hand, taking a second to chew and swallow before interjecting. No. That's just shallow rigs. Deepwater rigs like this are 10 feet into the ocean floor with cables, so they're still pretty sturdy, but they do float and rock a bit. So why didn't we feel any rocking last night? Julian shrugged. The sea must have been pretty calm all night, I guess. Mark scoffed. No way, dude. You felt how windy it was when we went out there. This thing would have been rocking like crazy if it wasn't bolted all the way down. Julian sat, brow furrowed for a second before shrugging and returning to his food. We all finished up our breakfast, and Savannah returned to their room to grab her camera while we prepared to leave the quarters. As we stepped out into the salty morning air, the daylight washed the rig in a radiant glow. It was incredible how different it looked in the daytime. The yellow structure towered past the narrow catwalk leading away from the living area. I looked down beneath the grated floor beneath me, and noted that the waves seemed much more intense this morning than they had last night, crashing against the gargantuan structure sinking beneath their depths. I still didn't feel any rocking, as much as Mark typically acted a de facto leader of sorts. There was a silent understanding that, at least for today, we followed Julian. He knew the ins and outs of a place like this, and we'd be way less likely to get lost if we stayed close. He led us around the catwalk, towards the stairs that would take us to the upper levels. Savannah stopped us what seemed like every 20 feet to get another picture of the rig, and as much as I wanted to be annoyed, I couldn't blame her. We'd entered dozens of brutal ISD structures before, but the rig took the cake for the most striking. Outside the crew quarters, every fastener served a purpose, nothing wasted on from overfunction. Platforms hung suspended in the air above our heads. Utility sections that would normally be hidden from view intertwined and encompassing the limited areas designated for human use. As she stopped to take a photo of one of the platforms ahead of us, Savannah froze in place before lowering her camera, gesturing for us to hold still. Guys, do you see that? We looked to where she indicated, and sure as day there was a security camera aimed right at us. My head immediately began to swivel around wildly, searching for any other cameras we may have missed. As Savannah, Maria, and I slowly started panicking, Mark began to laugh at us. I noticed those last night too, Mark said with a sheet-eating grin. I flipped out too. Julian was kind enough to wait 5 minutes before explaining that they're not broadcasting anywhere off-site. They're wired in directly to the on-site systems. Julian leaned smugly against the rails. You could have at least let them freak out about it for a few more seconds, man. Would have been hilarious. Savannah rolled her eyes and playfully punched Mark in the shoulder as she passed him on the stair. By the time we finished exploring the middle deck, it was nearly 9. We paused for a while to look out into the open sea. After a while, Maria coughed, an attempt to snag our attention. So, I don't want to sidetrack anything we're doing, but are we going to check out the signal or what? What signal? I asked. Savannah and Mark looked equally confused. Julian's face soured, and I caught him nudging her arm, as if she had brought up something sensitive. She shot him an incredulous look before continuing. It's just, well, before we went to bed last night, Jewel was telling me that. I said it was probably nothing. Drop it. Julian nearly snapped at her. I stood up straight from the railing I'd been leaning against, attempting to place myself closer between the two. No, go on, Maria. What was he telling you? She looked nervous, like a puppy backed into a corner. Well, it's just that he said that there was a signal that was being broadcast to the radio in the control room. He saw the oscillate something shown a reading, but the audio must have been turned off. I was under the impression he must have told you. Mark rose from his resting place as well, also moving towards Julian. His laid-back visage was quickly shed, replaced with a burning red anger. And you didn't bring this up. Why? If someone knows we're here, we could be seriously screwed. You and your girlfriend included. That must have been what? 10 hours ago? Julian backed away from the two of us, as Savannah put her hand on Mark's shoulder. Babe, he probably just didn't think about that. It's fine. We'll go check it out. And if it's not, if we end up in prison because we agreed to let Maria and this jack-off tag along, I turned to Mark. Whoa, man. Maria's the one who just let us know. Leave her out of this. Julian, caught in the middle between Mark and I, stepped back and towards Maria. Whoa. Whoa, guys. Calm down. I didn't mean anything by it. I saw the oscilloscope. I saw that it looked like it had been running a while. And I saw that the audio wasn't turned on. Signals come and go from these places all the time, regardless if anyone's here. I didn't bring it up because I thought it would be fun to show you guys today. That's all. Swear. Mark pointed a large, angry finger into Julian's chest. They're going to take us up there right now and show us that signal. And if there's even one hint of trouble for us, you can bet your ass the cops or the Coast Guard or whoever shows up will know just who it was that broke us in here. Julian led the way back up to the control room at the top of the rig. It was several levels higher than where we'd been prior, and reminded me of a fire watchtower overlooking the whole of the structure. Mark pulled the ring of keys from his pocket, but Julian reminded him of last night's handiwork. He pushed the door open easily. The handle had already been destroyed by the bolt cutters. As we collectively entered the control room, it was immediately clear that this was the most advanced facility we'd seen yet. On the wall to our left, broadcasting equipment covered the entire half of the room, wires running in and out of plugs. Long deactivated monitors dispersed throughout the tangled mass of cords. The wall immediately across from us consisted only of a large window, splashed and stained with dried sea salts. Outside, a window overlooked a crane that jutted out from the platform, its cable dangling far down into the murky water of the moon pool below us, concealing what lay at the end. On the wall to our right, a small metal desk lay covered in documents, while a massive control panel to its side glittered with shimmering indicators and buttons. Julian made his way over to the broadcasting station and indicated to a small green display. Sure enough, a sound wave bounced along the screen, a signal of some sort making its way to the device while no output could be heard. Well, find a way to turn the sound on, Mark implored. I could hear the thinly veiled curiosity poorly hidden behind the guise of anger. Julian searched for a moment before seemingly finding the correct knob. He turned it, and as he did, the audio signal began to play through the speakers. The sound of rushing water could clearly be heard, a slosh, echoing and distorted. See? I told you it was no big deal. Just some microphone attached to the structure down at the surface. As soon as the words left Julian's mouth, a voice began to cry out through the signal. It was grainy and distorted, as though the microphone recording was too close and too old. Oh, God. It worked. You're there. Please. You have to hurry. I need help. We sat frozen where we stood for several seconds, not knowing what to say. Maria cautiously approached the console, finding the closest thing that looked like a microphone, and began to speak into it. Hello? Who is this? Why do you need help? The voice cracked to life once more, this time louder and more difficult to make out. Yes, yes, I need help underneath the signal is too distorted. Slow down. Where are you? Underneath the rig. In the sub-facility. You'll need to take the lander. It's in the moon pool. Please. The chamber I'm stuck in is slowly filling up with water. I have hours left at most. You need to come and activate the pumps. They're down here, but I'm locked out. Please hurry. We all looked at each other for a moment. Was this some sort of joke? What's up, facility? Savannah grabbed the microphone from Maria. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Did you say you were nearby the oil rig? Are you in a submarine or something? No. I told you. I'm underneath the rig. The rig is a farce. The real facility is under the water. You can get here via the lander. I think it's the blue button. Right next to the desk behind you. Please hurry. The audio cut off suddenly. We sat there in silence for about 2 minutes before I spoke up. Mia, we should try to help. Shouldn't we? Mark looked at me like I was insane. Help? Help who? The mystery man who claims to be under the water? In a facility under an oil rig that no one's visited in a decade? Be serious, Elijah. This is clearly some sort of hoax. Savannah leaned against the desk, putting her head in her hands. I don't know. Mark, whoever that was, sounded pretty scared. Maybe this is legit? I looked across the room. Sure enough, on the panel next to the desk, a square blue button sat out amongst the rest. Underneath it, in black lettering, read the words SUBMERSIBLE from my research. A type of underwater elevator. As Mark and Savannah argued about the legitimacy of the signal, I walked over to the panel. Maria stood next to me. As I saw the fear in her eyes, I knew she believed the mysterious voice just as much as I had. I pressed the button. A klaxon alarm sounded throughout the whole rig, interrupting the argument behind me. Julian, who had stepped over to the window, called out, "Hey, everyone might want to look at this." My rig definitely didn't have one of these. As we made our way over to the window, we watched as the crane rapidly reeled in its seemingly infinite supply of cable. Suddenly, from down below, we heard an enormous splashing sound, followed by a thud and a click that echoed through the rest of the structure. We quickly descended the stairs exiting the control room, and Julian rushed ahead of us, beckoning for us to follow him to the lowest platform. As I made my way down the last flight of stairs, my breath was taken away as the lander came into view. Its rusted exterior was encrusted with sea moss and barnacles. It was mounted to the pillars that descended into the moon pool below, seemingly functioning as an elevator shaft for the hidden transport. A cable that ran from the top to the crane up above was taut, entangled with all manner of sea plants, printed in bold white lettering, partially rusted over and peeling but still legible, were the words W&H SUBMERSIBLE FACILITY. As we stood there awestruck, Savannah noticed a large red button on a pedestal next to the lander on the platform in front of us. Almost as if by instinct, she reached out and pressed it, and the doors of the lander slid open before us. Remarkably, it was entirely dry on the inside, with no hints of leakage anywhere to be seen. There were 3 rows of 5 seats each, arranged facing inwards towards the center of the lander. It was embarrassingly long before anyone had the courage to speak. Whatever was down there, whoever was down there, was seemingly real. This was an entire portion of this facility that we weren't prepared for, maybe even the majority of the facility. But someone needed our help, right? I swallowed hard and asked my friends, "So, are we getting in?"